You forget your place in this family. My sister-in-law Jessica snapped as her hand struck my left cheek. The sharp slap echoed through my formal dining room, temporarily silencing the low jazz music playing in the background. I touched my stinging face, slowly turning to look at my husband Marcus. We were celebrating our 10th anniversary, surrounded by his family. Instead of defending me, Marcus suddenly became entirely engrossed in folding his linen napkin. "She is a guest, Kendra," he muttered, not daring to meet my eyes. "Just apologize and let her serve herself first. You know how she gets." My name is Kendra. I am 34 years old, an African-American woman who built a premier crisis management firm from the ground up. For 8 years, I had bankrolled this entire family and their lifestyle, swallowing their passive-aggressive comments and blatant disrespect to keep the peace. But tonight, the peace was officially canceled. I looked at Jessica, a 32-year-old white woman who married Marcus and his younger brother David. She loved to flaunt her so-called old money pedigree to anyone who would listen, frequently offering backhanded compliments about my urban upbringing. I set down my silver serving fork. I stood up, adjusting my silk dress, and delivered a backhand across Jessica and her pale face so hard her designer chair tipped backward, sending her sprawling onto my imported Moroccan rug. "My place," I said, my voice dangerously low and steady, "is at the head of the table in the $2 million house that I paid for. Your place is on the floor." The dining room erupted into absolute chaos. Jessica shrieked, clutching her face, while David rushed to help her up. My mother-in-law Brenda practically leaped out of her seat. "Lord have mercy," she yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are an aggressive, ungrateful woman. Kendra, David, and Jessica are struggling right now. The least you could do is let her have the first lobster tail. But no, you strong black women think you do not need anybody just throwing your weight around. I would not have to be so strong if your sons were not so weak." "Brenda," I shot back, picking up my clutch from the sideboard. "And for the record, I bought the lobster. I hired the private chef. Jessica and her old money credit card declined at the liquor store this afternoon, so I paid for the wine you are currently drinking too." Jessica and her face went from pale to beet red. "You are a liar," she screamed, tears streaming down her face as she scrambled to her feet. "Marcus, are you going to let your wife talk to my family like this?" Marcus finally stood up, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of delayed masculinity. "Kendra, you have lost your mind. Apologize to my mother and to Jessica right now, or you can pack your bags and leave." I stared at the man I had married a decade ago. He was 35, working a mid-level tech support job, completely content to let me carry the financial and mental load of our entire existence, while he played the obedient son to a mother who clearly favored his younger brother. I had spent a decade shrinking myself so he could feel like the man of the house. I had paid off his student loans, bought the cars we drove, and funded the vacations his family bragged about on social media, all while smiling politely and playing the dutiful, supportive wife. "I do not need to pack my bags, Marcus," I said calmly. "I am taking Malik and Zuri, and we are going to a hotel. You can stay here and comfort your brother and his wife." "You cannot just leave your own anniversary party," David yelled, stepping in front of his weeping wife. "You are acting crazy." "Watch me," I replied, turning my back on the entire room. I walked up the sweeping mahogany staircase, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. I gathered my 8-year-old son Malik and my 6-year-old daughter Zuri, who were happily watching a movie in the upstairs playroom, completely oblivious to the war that had just broken out below them. "Come on, babies," I said softly, grabbing their jackets. "Mommy is taking us on a little adventure tonight." I guided my children down the back stairs and out through the garage, buckling them into my heavy vehicle. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the massive rush of adrenaline. As I backed out of the driveway of the gated community, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text message from Marcus. "You abandoned your own anniversary dinner. I am changing the locks tonight. I also froze our joint bank accounts. You are completely cut off until you come back here, apologize to Jessica, and beg for my forgiveness." I parked my car in the valet circle at the hotel downtown, handed the attendant my keys, and checked my kids into a luxury penthouse suite. I ordered them room service, kissed their foreheads, and poured myself a tall glass of sparkling water. Sitting on the velvet sofa overlooking the city skyline, I pulled out my phone to type my reply to my soon-to-be ex-husband. You cannot change the locks on a house owned by my company, which is a corporate entity registered solely in my name, before we even closed on the property. And you might want to check that joint bank account again. I withdrew my $150,000 contribution yesterday morning when I saw the suspicious charges you made at a jewelry store. You have exactly $42.18 left to your name. Buy Jessica an ice pack with it. The war has officially started right here and right now. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite, casting a warm glow over the plush bedding where my children slept soundly. I had barely closed my eyes all night, my mind racing through the financial logistics and legal strategies required to dismantle the life I had built with Marcus. I was sipping my second cup of black coffee when my phone shattered the quiet room with a shrill ring. The caller identification showed Tanya, my lead public relations assistant. She never called before 8 in the morning unless the world was ending. I stepped out onto the balcony, pulling the sliding glass door shut behind me so I would not wake Malik and Zuri. Good morning, Tanya, I answered, keeping my voice even and calm. Kendra, you need to open TikTok right now, Tanya said, her breath catching in her throat with sheer panic. Our company inbox is already flooded with hate mail, and the main office phone has been ringing off the hook for the past hour. I pulled the phone away from my ear, switched it to speaker, and opened the social media application. There, sitting at the very top of my feed with over 3 million views, was Jessica. She was sitting on what looked like a hospital bed, wearing a rigid foam neck brace and dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She had completely removed her makeup to look as pale and fragile as possible. I never thought I would have to make a video like this, Jessica whimpered to the camera, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed victimhood. Last night at a family dinner, I was brutally attacked by my sister-in-law. She always harbored a deep jealousy of my family and my heritage. I just tried to pass her a plate and she snapped. She is an unhinged, aggressive woman who assaulted me completely unprovoked. I am pressing charges, and I am calling on all of my followers to boycott her public relations firm immediately. We cannot allow violent women to operate businesses in our community. I stared at the screen, a cold laugh escaping my lips. Jessica was a masterful manipulator, utilizing every single racial stereotype in the book to weaponize her white tears against me. She knew exactly what buzzwords to use to incite an angry internet mob. It gets worse, Kendra, Tanya said, her voice shaking. Check your mother-in-law and her Facebook page. I switched applications and navigated to Brenda and her profile. Sure enough, Brenda had shared Jessica and her video directly to the Mount Zion Baptist Church Congregation Group, a page with over 4,000 active members in our city. Brenda had added her own venomous caption above the video. Please send your prayers for our family today. My son Marcus is trapped in a terribly abusive marriage with a woman who has completely lost the Lord and his guiding light. This is exactly what happens when a woman chooses her corporate vanity and arrogant pride over serving her husband and honoring her family. I gripped the balcony railing. Brenda had spent the last decade despising my success. She expected me to be a docile, subservient housewife who stayed in the shadows so her mediocre son could feel like a king. The fact that I paid for the roof over her head, funded her church donation pledges, and bought the designer hats she wore to Sunday service never mattered to her. She resented my financial power because it highlighted the absolute lack of ambition in her own children. Now, she was using this fabricated incident to publicly crucify me in front of the very community I had supported for years. Kendra, are you still there? Tanya asked, pulling me from my thoughts. Two of our mid-tier corporate clients just emailed us asking for emergency meetings this morning. They want to pause their retainer contracts because they do not want their brands associated with violent behavior or public scandals. What do you want me to do? Should we draft a press release denying the allegations? Should I prepare a cease and desist letter? Before I could answer, Tanya, my screen flashed with an incoming text message from Marcus. I opened the notification. Jessica is severely traumatized from your unprovoked attack last night. Marcus wrote, his words dripping with unearned authority. David and Jessica do not feel safe returning to their apartment, so I am moving them into our master bedroom permanently to protect them. You brought this public humiliation upon yourself, Kendra. I told you to just apologize and let her eat first. I read the message twice, marveling at the sheer audacity of this man. He was allowing his brother and his lying wife to completely take over my personal sanctuary, sleeping in my bed, while simultaneously blaming me for a public smear campaign that could cost me millions of dollars in revenue. He truly believed he had me backed into a corner. He thought the threat of losing my clients and my public reputation would force me to come crawling back, checkbook in hand, begging for a reconciliation. He had vastly underestimated the woman he married. "No, Tanya," I finally replied, walking back into the penthouse suite and grabbing my laptop from my travel bag. "Do not issue any statements. Never interrupt an enemy when they are making a fatal mistake. Stall the clients until noon. Tell them I will provide an update that completely clears our agency of wrongdoing." "Are you sure?" Tanya asked. "Yes," I said firmly. "I have exactly what we need." I ended the call and sat down at the glass table. What Jessica did not know was that my dining room possessed a hidden security camera. Marcus installed it 2 years ago. I downloaded the video which showed Jessica slapping me entirely unprovoked. I smiled, sending the footage directly to my lawyer for a massive defamation lawsuit. The email to my lawyer had barely registered as sent when my cell phone vibrated violently against the glass table. The caller identification displayed a name I knew intimately from high society galas and corporate donor lists: Richard Sterling. He was Jessica and her father, the supposedly untouchable patriarch of their old money family. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water before swiping the green button to accept the call. I did not even get the chance to say hello before his booming voice rattled through the speaker. "You have made a very serious mistake, Kendra." Richard snarled, his tone dripping with the kind of unearned authority that only comes from generations of unchecked privilege. "I just saw the video my daughter posted online. I am going to make absolutely sure your little public relations firm is completely bankrupted by Friday. I have friends on the city council. I have judges in my contact list. I will ruin you." I leaned back against the plush velvet sofa, letting his threats wash over me like warm rain. "Good morning to you too, Richard," I said smoothly. "Do not patronize me." He barked, his breathing heavy with rage. "You people always think you can climb the corporate ladder and suddenly stand on equal footing with families like mine. The Sterling name commands respect in this city. We built this local economy while your ancestors were completely irrelevant. My daughter is a Sterling. She deserves absolute deference, and instead you viciously attacked her like some street thug. I am going to make an example out of you so that everyone in your urban community understands exactly what happens when you disrespect real power." His words were a perfect mirror of Jessica and her behavior. The exact same entitlement, the exact same racial undertones, and the exact same expectation of blind submission without ever actually earning a single ounce of respect. He believed his pale skin and his country club memberships gave him the ultimate right to dictate my reality. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am just getting started," Richard threatened. "By noon today, your business licenses will be under severe review. By tomorrow, your top clients will receive anonymous tips about your violent tendencies. You messed with the wrong family, Kendra." I did not yell. I did not raise my voice or defend my character. Instead, I placed my phone on the table, keeping him on speaker, and opened a highly encrypted folder on my laptop desktop. I typed in my master password and pulled up a 70-page financial audit. "Before you call your friends on the city council, Richard, you might want to call your chief financial officer," I said, tracing a manicured finger over the glowing screen. "Or better yet, you should probably call a federal defense attorney." The line went completely silent. The heavy, angry breathing stopped abruptly. "What are you talking about?" he finally stammered, the arrogant boom in his voice suddenly replaced by a slight, noticeable tremor. "My firm, Richard," I said, letting the words hang in the air for maximum impact. "The little public relations firm you just threatened to bankrupt by Friday. We were retained exactly 3 weeks ago by your corporate board of directors through a blind proxy. They hired my agency to build a massive crisis mitigation strategy because they discovered a severe discrepancy in your accounting department. You have been actively embezzling from your own employee pension fund for the last 5 years to keep up your lavish lifestyle. I could hear a sharp intake of breath. I was literally choking on his own panic. Your daughter and her trust fund does not exist, Richard. I continued reading directly from the executive summary on my screen. Your corporate credit lines are completely maxed out. Your personal assets are heavily leveraged against fraudulent loans. You are not old money anymore. You are just old debt dressed up in a nice suit. Listen to me, Kendra, Richard pleaded, his entire demeanor shifting from a powerful patriarch to a desperate, cornered animal. We can handle this quietly. You are a smart businesswoman. We can arrange a very generous consulting bonus for your firm. Just keep this audit contained. I can fix the accounts. I just need a little more time. I do not accept bribes, and I certainly do not protect criminals who threaten my livelihood, I replied coldly. As of 9 o'clock this morning, my firm is officially dropping you and your corporation as a client due to a severe conflict of interest. We do not represent individuals who engage in public defamation campaigns against our chief executive officer. Kendra, please do not do this, he begged, the panic now fully consuming him. If this gets out, I will go to federal prison. My family will lose everything. Jessica will have nothing. Jessica already has nothing, Richard. She is just too arrogant to realize it yet, I said, closing the encrypted file. Oh, and there is one more thing. By law, as a contracted corporate entity that has uncovered definitive proof of severe financial crimes, I am legally obligated to forward these initial compliance findings directly to the authorities. I am sending the entire unredacted audit report to the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately. Have a blessed day. I pressed the red button to end the call, cutting off his desperate screams. The false empire he had built was officially crumbling, and I held the match that started the fire. But the ultimate betrayal was still waiting for me, and it was going to come from the man I had shared my bed with for a decade. Marcus was about to learn a very painful lesson. When you try to bury a strong, independent black woman who meticulously built her own empire from the ground up, you only end up digging your own grave completely and absolutely. He will regret everything, today. The heavy bass of a gospel remix echoed through my backyard, vibrating against the stone walls of my $2 million estate. From my tinted vehicle parked down the street, I watched church members in their Sunday best flood through my iron gates. Jessica wasted no time. Panicked by her father and his fraudulent empire collapsing, she needed control. She convinced Marcus and Brenda to throw a massive eviction barbecue to celebrate my supposed departure. They genuinely believed I was sitting in a hotel room crying over my ruined reputation. I stepped out, smoothing my tailored blazer. Through the wrought iron fence, I saw Brenda holding court near my custom outdoor kitchen, flipping burgers and waving tongs aggressively as her voice carried. "It is about time my son put his foot down and reclaimed his castle," Brenda shouted to a group of nodding church ladies. "Marcus works so hard providing every dime for this massive house, while that aggressive woman prances around acting like the boss. He finally locked her out and took back his property, praise the Lord." I smiled at the sheer delusion. Marcus was a mid-level internet support technician who barely cleared $50,000 a year. He could not afford the property taxes on this estate, let alone the mortgage or the imported stone grill Brenda was leaning against. For 10 years, I maintained this ridiculous fantasy to protect his fragile male ego. I allowed his mother to believe he was a provider when he was a dependent. That charade was officially over. I did not walk into my backyard alone. Flanked by the county sheriff and 2 armed deputies, our boots crunched against the gravel driveway. As we rounded the house, I walked directly to the sound system and yanked the power cord out of the wall socket. The music died instantly. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the 70 guests scattered across my manicured lawn. The cheerful chatter evaporated into shocked gasps as they noticed the uniformed officers standing behind me. Jessica dropped her plastic cup. It hit the patio floor, splashing across her designer sandals, but she did not blink. She just stared at me, her face draining of color. Marcus pushed his way through the crowd of frozen church members, holding a spatula like a weapon. He puffed out his chest, desperately trying to maintain his authoritative facade. "What is the meaning of this, Kendra?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking slightly as his eyes darted to the deputies. "I told you that you are not welcome here. You abandoned this family. This is my property, and I have every legal right to throw a party in my own backyard. Officers, please escort this woman off my premises immediately. She is trespassing." The sheriff did not flinch. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of boredom and deep pity. "Sir, we are not here to escort Mrs. Williams off the property," the sheriff stated, his deep voice carrying across the silent yard. "We are here to ensure that you and your unauthorized guests vacate her premises peacefully and immediately." Marcus let out a condescending laugh, looking back at his mother for validation. "Her premises, officer, we have been married for 10 years. This is a community property state. This house is a marital asset. She cannot just kick me out of my own home because she threw a temper tantrum. I have squatter rights. I have marital rights. You cannot enforce an eviction without a judge." I stepped forward, reaching into my leather briefcase. I did not yell, and I did not argue. I simply pulled out a legally binding document bearing a brilliant gold seal and handed it directly to the sheriff. "Actually, Marcus, it is not a marital asset at all," I said, my voice ringing out clearly for every church member to hear. "You seem to have conveniently forgotten the events that took place exactly 3 years ago. Remember when you secretly drained our shared savings account to invest in your brother and his doomed cryptocurrency scheme? Remember when you lost $80,000 of my hard-earned money in a single afternoon?" Marcus went completely rigid. The color vanished from his face as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brenda lowered her tongs, her jaw hanging open in sheer disbelief. "When I caught you," I continued, stepping closer, "you begged me not to divorce you. You pleaded to stay. I agreed to stay on one specific condition. You signed a post-nuptial agreement drafted by my corporate attorneys, officially relinquishing any and all claims to this property, my business, and my future assets. You signed away your marital rights to save yourself from financial ruin." The sheriff finished scanning the document, nodding slowly as he verified the signatures and the judicial stamps. He folded the paperwork and handed it back to me before stepping directly in front of Marcus. "The documentation is perfectly legal and heavily verified, sir," the sheriff announced firmly, resting his hand near his utility belt. "This property belongs entirely to the K-Corp Liability Company, which is solely owned by your wife. You have absolutely no legal standing here, and you are currently trespassing on private property." Jessica let out a loud, theatrical sob, clinging to David and his arm. Brenda clutched her chest, looking like she might faint right into the potato salad. The entire congregation stared at Marcus, the illusion of his grand success completely shattered in front of their eyes. He was not a provider. He was not the king of his castle. He was just a thief who had been living on borrowed time and my generous grace. "You have exactly 15 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate this property," the sheriff commanded, his voice booming over the stunned crowd. "If anyone is still standing in this backyard when that timer runs out, you will be arrested and charged with criminal trespassing. The countdown clock starts right now, so I strongly suggest that you quickly pack up your bags and leave my property before I press criminal charges against everyone." The mass exodus from my backyard was an absolute spectacle of pure poetic justice. Dozens of church members who had spent the last 2 hours dining on my dime and loudly gossiping about my character were now frantically scrambling over each other to reach the front gate. Plates of half-eaten barbecue were dropped carelessly onto the grass. The sheer panic in their eyes as the deputies stood firm, hands resting near their heavy radios, was undeniable. I stood on my stone patio, watching the frantic procession, feeling infinitely lighter than I had in a decade. Brenda was the first to reach the sprawling front lawn, hyperventilating as she leaned heavily against David for physical support. Jessica followed closely behind, her rigid foam neck brace, looking increasingly ridiculous as she furiously dialed her cell phone, likely trying to reach her disgraced father for a rescue that was never coming. The wealthy neighbors in our upscale exclusive community had already gathered on their meticulously manicured lawns, clutching their morning coffees and watching the massive commotion with unconcealed fascination. "You are ruining our lives!" Jessica screamed from the sidewalk, her voice cracking loudly as she pointed a manicured finger at me through the tall iron gate. You are a vindictive, horrible woman. My family is going through an absolute financial crisis right now, and you are throwing us out onto the street like discarded trash. You are going to pay for this. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or offer a retort. I simply locked the heavy iron gate, listening to the satisfying metallic click of the deadbolt echoing clearly in the morning air. David, who had spent his entire life being treated as the infallible golden child of the family, finally snapped. He turned his misplaced rage toward his younger brother, pushing Marcus roughly by the shoulder. "Control your wife, Marcus!" David demanded, his face twisting with arrogant fury and humiliation. "Are you really going to stand here and let her humiliate us in front of the entire neighborhood? Do something. You are supposed to be the man of this house. Fix this absolute mess right now." Marcus looked around at the staring neighbors, the departing police cruisers, and the angry glare of his older brother. The grand illusion of his success was completely shattered, leaving him desperate to salvage any shred of his deeply bruised masculinity. He puffed out his chest, stepping up to the wrought iron gate, trying to look intimidating through the cold metal bars. "This is not over, Kendra." Marcus spat, his voice trembling with a potent mix of deep embarrassment and unearned rage. "You think you have won because of some stupid technicality on a piece of paper, but you are gravely mistaken. I am taking you to family court. I am going to completely destroy your reputation in front of a judge. I will take full custody of Malik and Zuri, and I will make absolutely sure you pay me massive alimony for the rest of your miserable life. You will never see those kids again." I looked at him, completely unfazed by his pathetic, hollow threats. He was a man who could not even afford his own basic car insurance, threatening to bankrupt a corporate executive. It was almost entirely comedic. "Get off my sidewalk, Marcus, before I have the deputies return and arrest you for loitering," I said smoothly, turning my back on him and confidently walking up the driveway to my front door. The moment I stepped inside my quiet, empty house, I went straight to work. The emotional weight of the confrontation was quickly replaced by calculated strategy. Within 30 minutes, an emergency commercial locksmith arrived at my property. Every single lock on the doors, the windows, and the heavy garage was completely replaced and rekeyed. I immediately called my private security firm to significantly upgrade the entire perimeter monitoring system, ensuring that any movement near my property line would immediately trigger a rapid police dispatch. I was not leaving absolutely anything to chance. Next, I sat at my desk and dialed my corporate attorney. We needed to prepare for the inevitable divorce filing Marcus was threatening. I requested the immediate hiring of a ruthless forensic accountant. I wanted every single financial transaction, bank statement, and hidden receipt from our 10-year marriage thoroughly audited. If he wanted to threaten me in family court, I was going to provide the judge with a microscopic, undeniable breakdown of his complete financial parasitism. The rest of the evening was blissfully quiet. I brought Malik and Zuri back from the hotel, ordering their favorite gourmet pizza and watching movies in the living room. For the first time in years, the house felt truly mine. There were no passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, no subtle jabs about my demanding working hours, and no ungrateful relatives tracking mud across my carpets. I tucked my beautiful children into bed, kissed their foreheads, and went to sleep feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of peace. The war was far from over, but the first major battle was a decisive victory. That peaceful feeling vanished abruptly the next morning. At exactly 8 o'clock, a sharp, highly authoritative knock echoed loudly from my front door. I pulled my silk robe tightly around my shoulders, checking the upgraded security monitor on the digital wall panel. Standing on my front porch were two serious individuals. One was a uniformed city police officer, and the other was a woman carrying a thick clipboard and wearing a lanyard with a very specific, chilling credential. I opened the heavy wooden door, bracing myself mentally. "Good morning," the woman said, her face unreadable. "Are you Kendra Williams? I am a senior investigator with Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous emergency report last night. The caller stated you are physically abusive to your children and they are in extreme danger. We need to come inside and interview your son and daughter immediately." "Please come in," I said, stepping aside and gesturing toward my sunlit living room. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not panic. When you operate a crisis management firm, you learn very quickly that hysteria is the enemy of strategy. I led the investigator, Ms. Carter, to the formal sitting area. The uniformed officer remained by the front door, resting his hand comfortably on his radio belt. I understand you have a job to do, I told Ms. Carter, taking a seat opposite her. But before you speak with Malik and Zuri, I would like to provide some context regarding the timing of this anonymous report. Ms. Carter pulled a pen from her pocket. The report we received was highly concerning, Mrs. Williams. The caller alleged a history of violent outbursts, claiming this is a dangerous environment for minors. I nodded slowly, reaching for my leather briefcase resting on the coffee table. I pulled out a thick, meticulously organized binder. These are my children's medical histories, including pediatric checkups, dental records, and vaccination charts. You will also find their latest report cards from their private academy, along with character references from their teachers and the school principal. Furthermore, I have something else you need to see. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward her. I played the raw, high-definition security footage from my dining room the night before. Ms. Carter watched in absolute silence as the video displayed Jessica violently snatching the serving tongs and slapping me completely unprovoked, followed by my swift, singular act of self-defense. The caller who reported me was my husband Marcus, or perhaps his sister-in-law Jessica, I explained, closing the laptop. I legally evicted them from my property yesterday afternoon after this exact altercation. This emergency report is nothing but a retaliatory tactic designed to punish me for cutting off their financial access. Ms. Carter let out a long, heavy sigh, her professional facade cracking just a fraction. She looked down at her clipboard. I have been doing this job for 15 years, Mrs. Williams. You learn to recognize patterns. The language used in this complaint was incredibly specific. The caller repeatedly described you as an aggressive, loud, and inherently violent woman who created an unstable, dangerous urban environment. It is a very tired, highly offensive racial trope used to weaponize the system against successful Black mothers. Seeing your home, reviewing these pristine records, and watching that footage tells me exactly what is actually happening here. I felt a small wave of relief wash over me. She saw right through their blatant racist dog whistles. I still need to speak with the children privately. Ms. Carter stated, her tone softening significantly. It is standard protocol, but I will make it brief. Of course, I agreed, walking to the foot of the stairs to call Malik and Zuri down. They descended the staircase in their matching pajamas, looking completely unbothered and curious. Ms. Carter spoke with them in the adjacent sunroom while the police officer waited near the foyer. Through the glass French doors, I watched my children laugh and chat easily with the investigator. There were no signs of fear, no hesitation, just two happy, well-adjusted kids, explaining how much they loved their mother and how they spent the previous evening eating gourmet pizza and watching animated movies. Within 20 minutes, the interviews were concluded. Ms. Carter emerged from the sunroom, offering me a warm, reassuring smile. Your children are absolutely delightful, incredibly polite, and very clearly thriving, she announced, closing her thick folder. I am closing this investigation immediately. The allegations are entirely unfounded, and I will be noting in my official report that this complaint was filed maliciously. Thank you, Ms. Carter, I said, walking her toward the front door. Just as she reached for the handle, Malik came running out of the living room, holding a sleek silver device in his small hands. Wait, officer, Malik called out innocently, his bright eyes wide with earnest helpfulness. Dad left his game tablet on the charger in the home office before he had to leave yesterday. He uses it to play puzzles. Do you need to take it to him? Malik held out Marcus and his old iPad. He had upgraded to a newer model months ago, leaving this one behind for the kids to occasionally use. I had completely forgotten it was still plugged into the wall behind my desk. We do not transport personal property, sweetie, the officer chuckled, patting Malik gently on the shoulder. You give that to your mom. Malik shrugged and handed the tablet directly to me. I thanked the officials once more, locked the front door behind them, and ushered the kids back to the kitchen for breakfast. While they ate their cereal, I sat at the island counter, staring at the silver device resting in my palms. The screen was dark, but a blinking green light indicated it was fully charged. Out of pure curiosity, I pressed the home button. The screen illuminated instantly. Marcus was incredibly lazy with his digital security. He had never changed the basic 4-digit passcode. I typed in his birth year and the tablet unlocked immediately. My breath caught in my throat. Because the device was still connected to my high-speed home internet, his cloud account had been automatically syncing every single message, email, and notification from his primary cell phone. The screen was flooded with alerts. I tapped the messaging application, my eyes immediately drawn to a highly active thread pinned to the very top. The contact name was simply listed as J. I opened the conversation thread. I expected to find Marcus and Jessica conspiring about their false report. Instead, I found something that completely shattered my entire understanding of their deeply toxic dynamic. I scrolled up. Marcus had been secretly funneling massive amounts of cash directly into her private offshore bank account. I scrolled through the thread, my heart pounding a slow, rhythmic beat against my ribs. The financial transfers were just the beginning. Marcus was not simply sending Jessica money to support a failing lifestyle or covering up for David and his supposed business debts. He was paying for something entirely different. I tapped on an encrypted photo album buried deep within the file system of the tablet. The screen loaded, populating with dozens of high-definition images that completely shattered the 10-year illusion of my marriage. There were pictures of Marcus and Jessica tangled together in the plush white sheets of the Four Seasons downtown. There were selfies of them clinking champagne glasses on private balconies and videos of Marcus kissing her neck while she giggled into the camera. The timestamps told a devastating story of ultimate betrayal. This was not a brief lapse in judgment or a recent mistake. Marcus and Jessica had been carrying on a full-blown secret affair for over a year, right under my nose and right under David and his completely oblivious watch. Everything suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. I thought back to our 9th anniversary, when Marcus called me from his office claiming a massive server crash required him to work through the night to provide for our family. I had eaten my catered dinner alone, telling myself that his dedication to his mediocre job was admirable. He had actually been 3 miles away ordering expensive room service with his brother and his wife, using the very money he had stolen from my accounts. I thought about Malik and his school play the piano recitals Zuri cried through because her father was absent. He always blamed his crushing workload. He was never working. He was playing house with a white woman who openly despised me, using my hard-earned wealth to fund their twisted, adulterous fantasy. I did not shed a single tear. Crying is an emotional response reserved for people you actually value. Marcus was no longer my husband. He was a liability, a treacherous parasite who had attempted to weaponize Child Protective Services against me to cover up his own disgusting sins. I immediately went into full crisis management mode. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously taking screenshots of every single message, every bank transfer receipt, and every explicit photograph. I uploaded the entire cache of damning evidence to my highly secured encrypted cloud server, ensuring multiple digital backups existed in case Marcus realized his fatal error and attempted to remotely wipe the device. Once the data was safely secured, I picked up my phone and drafted a calculated text message to David. I needed to isolate the variables in this equation. David was arrogant, but he was also deeply proud and obsessed with his public image. If I was going to detonate this bomb, I needed to control the blast radius. David, we need to meet immediately to discuss a confidential business settlement regarding the eviction, I typed. I am willing to negotiate, but I will only speak with you alone. Meet me at the Roasted Bean Coffee House on 5th Avenue in exactly 1 hour. Come alone or the deal is permanently off the table. He replied less than 2 minutes later, his greed blinding him to the obvious trap. I will be there. You finally realize you cannot win against us. I changed into a sharp-tailored crimson suit, touched up my lipstick, and instructed my trusted nanny to watch the kids while I handled a brief corporate emergency. When I walked into the crowded, bustling coffee shop, David was already sitting in a corner booth. He looked incredibly smug, wearing a designer polo shirt that I had undoubtedly paid for at some point, sipping an iced latte with the relaxed posture of a man who believed he had already won the war. I did not sit down. I did not order a drink or exchange pleasantries. I walked directly over to his booth, unclasped my leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick manila envelope containing the high-quality color-printed photographs of his wife and his younger brother. I tossed the heavy envelope onto the table. It landed with a satisfying authoritative thud right next to his iced coffee. "There is no financial settlement, David," I stated, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the coffee shop with absolute precision. "But there is a very important business matter you need to attend to immediately. Your wife is currently sleeping in my old bed with your brother, which is fitting considering she has been sleeping with him in luxury hotels for the past 14 months. David scoffed, rolling his eyes as he reached for the envelope. "You are truly pathetic, Kendra. Fabricating lies because you are bitter and locked out." His voice completely died in his throat as he pulled the photographs from the envelope. I watched the color rapidly drain from his face. His eyes darted frantically across the glossy images of Marcus and Jessica, entangled in hotel beds, their secret text messages explicitly detailing their encounters, and the massive financial wire transfers Marcus had sent to her private offshore account. The undeniable, repulsive truth was staring him right in the face. His perfect old money wife and his loyal, subservient brother had been making an absolute fool out of him for over a year. I waited for the explosion. I waited for the anger, the betrayal, the immediate urge to storm out and confront the two people who had destroyed his marriage. Instead, David slowly placed the photographs back onto the table. His hands were shaking slightly, but his expression hardened into something cold, defensive, and deeply toxic. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing with a familiar, deeply ingrained hostility. "This is your fault," David hissed, his voice venomous and blaming. "You pushed him away with your demanding career and your selfish ambition. This is entirely your absolute fault." I stared at David, completely immune to his pathetic attempt at deflecting blame. He was looking at undeniable photographic evidence of his own wife draped over his younger brother in a luxury hotel room, yet his fragile ego simply could not process the betrayal. It was far easier for him to attack the ambitious black woman sitting across from him than to confront the white parasite he had married. "You are just as delusional as your brother," I said evenly, standing up from the booth. "I gave you the truth. What you do next is your own tragedy." I turned on my heel and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him alone with the physical proof of his destroyed marriage. I knew exactly what his next move would be. Instead of confronting Jessica, David immediately ran straight to the one person who always shielded him from reality. He went crying to Brenda. 30 minutes later, my cell phone rang as I was driving back to my secure home. The caller identification flashed my mother-in-law and her name. I connected the call through my vehicle Bluetooth system, preparing myself for the inevitable storm of irrational defense. "You are a wicked, spiteful homewrecker, Kendra!" Brenda screamed into the phone, her voice piercing the speakers with venom. "David just showed me those forged photographs. How dare you try to tear two holy marriages apart just because you are bitter? You fabricated those pictures to destroy Jessica because you have always been incredibly jealous of her." "I did not forge bank wire transfers, Brenda," I replied calmly, keeping my eyes on the road. "Your youngest son has been draining his savings to finance a secret year-long affair with his brother and his wife. The evidence is completely irrefutable." "You are lying!" she shrieked, entirely blinded by her internalized misogyny and her pathetic obsession with Jessica and her proximity to whiteness. Brenda worshipped the illusion of the Sterling family wealth. She would rather brand her daughter-in-law a liar than admit her precious white daughter-in-law was a fraudulent gold digger using both of her sons. Jessica comes from a highly respected, affluent family. She does not need a single dime from Marcus. You drove him to this point with your constant working and masculine energy. If you had just submitted to your husband like a proper wife, he would not have sought comfort elsewhere. You failed him. I gripped the leather steering wheel, utterly repulsed by her toxic backwards mentality. She was aggressively refusing to hold the men in her family accountable, choosing instead to tear down the very woman who had funded her lifestyle for an entire decade. She was a lost cause, fully committed to her own delusion. "I am not your scapegoat anymore, Brenda." I stated firmly, my voice echoing in the quiet car. Your sons are grown deceitful men who made their own destructive choices. You can coddle them all you want, in whatever cheap apartment you end up in, because the financial gravy train is officially permanently derailed. Do not ever call my phone again. I disconnected the call immediately. At the next red light, I blocked Brenda, David, Marcus, and Jessica across every single communication platform and social media application I owned. They were completely severed from my personal network. The era of my endless patience had spectacularly concluded. As soon as I arrived home, I contacted my corporate attorney and instructed her to file an expedited at-fault divorce petition. We were citing egregious adultery and the severe dissipation of marital assets. I wanted every single dollar Marcus had funneled to Jessica accounted for, and I wanted it returned to me with interest. I was not going to leave him a single scrap of dignity or financial stability. For 3 blessedly quiet weeks, I focused entirely on my children and my thriving public relations firm. My business continued to boom, especially after the Sterling family embezzlement scandal officially hit the local news cycle, validating my abrupt professional withdrawal from their fraudulent corporation. I was operating at the peak of my game. Then the inevitable legal retaliation arrived at my front door. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing a new marketing proposal, when a process server knocked firmly on my glass door. He handed me a thick, heavy manila envelope. I signed for the delivery, carried the package back to my kitchen counter, and tore open the seal. It was the official counterpetition from Marcus and his bottom-tier divorce lawyer. I scanned the first few pages, my eyebrows raising at the sheer unadulterated audacity of his legal demands. Marcus was not just contesting the divorce. He was portraying himself as a deeply oppressed stay-at-home father who had sacrificed his own brilliant career trajectory to support my professional ambitions. He was formally demanding 50% ownership of my crisis management firm. I was asking the court to award him $10,000 a month in permanent spousal alimony to maintain the standard of living he had grown accustomed to during our marriage. I let out a short, incredulous laugh. He was demanding a king and his ransom using the very legal system he thought he could easily manipulate. But as I finally flipped to the final page of his sworn affidavit, the laughter instantly died in my throat. My eyes locked onto a specific, highly detailed, highlighted paragraph buried near the very bottom of the legal document. Marcus had dropped an absolute life-altering bomb into the legal proceedings. He claimed he desperately needed the exorbitant alimony and the massive share of my business because he was about to incur significant new financial responsibilities. According to the sworn legal filing, Jessica was exactly 3 months pregnant. Marcus was formally declaring himself the biological father of her unborn baby, and he was violently demanding my hard-earned money to raise his brand-new, completely and entirely illegitimate child. The sheer audacity of Marcus and his legal counterpetition did not just stay confined to the courtroom documents. By Sunday morning, the news of Jessica and her pregnancy had thoroughly saturated the Mount Zion Baptist Church gossip mill. My former mother-in-law, Brenda, practically orchestrated a parade down the center aisle of the sanctuary. Several of my former friends who still attended the congregation texted me real-time updates of the spectacle. Brenda had proudly escorted Jessica into the church, treating her like royalty. She publicly embraced Jessica and her growing belly, loudly declaring to anyone who would listen that this child was a magnificent blessing from God. She framed the scandalous pregnancy as a divine reward for Marcus, finally escaping my so-called oppressive career-obsessed clutches. In Brenda and her twisted self-serving reality, this new baby with a white woman was the ultimate prize, the culmination of her deep-seated obsession with proximity to whiteness and fabricated wealth. What sickened me the most was not the blatant hypocrisy of a church celebrating an affair. It was the devastating speed with which Brenda completely discarded her actual living grandchildren. In the 3 weeks since the eviction barbecue, Brenda had not called Malik or Zuri a single time. She had not sent a text, mailed a card, or asked to see them. Marcus was equally absent. He had completely abandoned his own children to play the role of the protective, expectant father to a woman who had slapped their mother. I had to sit my beautiful, innocent children down in our sunroom that Sunday afternoon and answer questions no mother should ever have to answer. Malik looked at me with his big, soulful eyes and asked why his father and grandmother did not want to come over for Sunday dinner anymore. Suri cried, asking if she had done something wrong to make her daddy leave. I pulled them into my arms, holding them tightly against my chest. I did not lie to them, but I protected their hearts. I explained that adults sometimes make terrible, selfish choices that have absolutely nothing to do with how wonderful and worthy they are. I kissed their tears away and promised them that I would always be there to protect them. Looking at my children and their broken hearts, a cold, unyielding fury settled deep into my bones. I made a silent, unbreakable vow right then and there. I was going to legally obliterate Marcus Williams. I was going to strip him of every single asset, every shred of dignity, and every ounce of leverage he thought he possessed, ensuring he could never ever hurt my children again. If Marcus wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial extortion, using a pregnancy as his primary leverage, I needed to know exactly who and what I was dealing with. Jessica was a masterful liar who had managed to deceive her own husband for over a year. I seriously doubted her deceptive capabilities started and ended with Marcus. The next morning, I contacted a highly recommended private investigator. I did not hire a standard domestic dispute detective. I hired a former federal agent who specialized in corporate espionage and deep background checks. We met in the secure conference room of my public relations firm. I handed him a thick file containing everything I knew about Jessica, her fraudulent father, and the timeline of her affair with Marcus. I instructed him to dig into every single aspect of her life during the hours Marcus was supposedly at work, paying for her luxury hotel rooms. I needed to know exactly who else she was seeing, where her money was actually coming from, before Marcus started draining our accounts, and every secret she had buried. I wrote him a blank check and told him I needed actionable leverage within 72 hours. Exactly 3 days later, my private investigator requested an urgent in-person meeting. He arrived at my home office late in the evening carrying a locked fireproof briefcase. He did not look triumphant. He looked genuinely stunned by what he had uncovered. He sat across from my desk, unlocked his briefcase, and pulled out a single heavily redacted medical document. He did not hand me photos of Jessica and her other lovers first. Instead, he slid this specific clinical report directly across the polished wood of my desk. He explained that while tracking down the timeline of the affair, he had cross-referenced Marcus and his medical history to verify some insurance claims Marcus had filed during our marriage. The document resting in front of me was a certified urology report from exactly 3 years ago, a report Marcus had paid for entirely out of pocket and hidden from me. I picked up the paper, my eyes scanning the clinical diagnosis. 3 years ago, Marcus had contracted a severe untreated infection while on a weekend trip he claimed was for a technology conference. Because he was too cowardly to seek immediate medical treatment and risk me finding out about his infidelity. Even back then, the infection had progressed to a catastrophic level. The final medical conclusion was highlighted in bright yellow ink. The condition had caused irreversible damage to his reproductive system. Marcus was completely, permanently, and 100% sterile. He literally could not be the father of Jessica and her unborn baby. He was demanding half of my company and $10,000 a month in alimony to raise a child that mathematically and biologically belonged to another man. I stared deeply at the certified medical receipt, a slow, highly predatory smile spreading across my entire face. This arrogant, pathetic, absolute fool had just willingly handed me the exact, undeniable weapon I needed to completely destroy him under oath. I locked the certified medical document inside my heavy steel safe. The final legal battle was approaching, and I was going to annihilate his entire existence without a single ounce of mercy. The heavy steel safe clicked shut, securing the medical document that proved Marcus was entirely sterile. But the private investigator had left a massive encrypted flash drive on my desk, alongside that single piece of paper. I plugged the small drive into my laptop, pouring myself a fresh cup of dark coffee as the files loaded onto my bright screen. If Marcus was not the biological father of Jessica and her unborn child, I absolutely needed to know exactly who was. The investigator had done a spectacular job tracking her hidden digital footprint. I opened a folder labeled with financial records, expecting to see more wire transfers from my deceitful husband. Instead, I found a dizzying array of massive cash deposits originating from 4 different offshore bank accounts. Jessica was not just cheating on David with his younger brother. She was running a highly organized, clandestine financial operation. She had been sleeping with multiple wealthy men across the city to successfully fund her fabricated, luxurious lifestyle. I clicked through a long series of high-resolution surveillance photographs taken outside various upscale hotels, expensive restaurants, and private airport hangars. I recognized the powerful men in the glossy pictures immediately. One was a prominent local real estate developer. Another was a highly respected county judge. But the most shocking photograph featured Jessica locking lips with a man named Harrison Sterling. Harrison was not just any random billionaire. He was the primary corporate business rival of Richard Jessica and her own father. She was literally sleeping with the sworn enemy of her fraudulent family just to maintain her pathetic illusion of extreme wealth and power. The pieces of this deeply toxic puzzle snapped together with brutal, undeniable clarity. Jessica and her entire identity was an absolute, completely fabricated lie. She did not come from old money or prestige. She came from old debt and massive, crushing desperation. She used her pale skin, her blonde hair, and a stolen country club membership to create a fake aura of elite status. And Marcus, in his infinite pathetic gullibility, fell right into her devious trap. I was desperate for the exact kind of superficial validation she represented. For his entire life, Marcus had desperately sought the approval of his mother, Brenda. Brenda worshipped white proximity and viewed it as the ultimate crowning symbol of social climbing. Marcus allowed Jessica to use him as a personal automated teller machine because funding her fake rich lifestyle made him feel like a powerful, wealthy provider. He happily sacrificed his loyal black wife, his beautiful children, and his own dignity just to impress a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a convenient temporary paycheck. She manipulated his deep-seated pathetic insecurities effortlessly. While Marcus foolishly thought he was the star of a passionate, forbidden romance, he was actually just one of many desperate men financing her designer wardrobe. He drained our joint savings to pay for her luxury suites, completely oblivious to the fact that she was leaving those same expensive suites to jump directly into the waiting beds of local billionaires. The sheer magnitude of his absolute stupidity was almost difficult to comprehend. I leaned back in my leather executive chair, a cold, highly calculated strategy forming in my focused mind. Any other angry woman might have immediately posted the sterility report online or mailed it directly to Brenda and her gossiping church congregation. But I am a professional crisis management executive. I know that the absolute most destructive weapons in any war are the ones your enemy never sees coming. I decided right then and there to keep his permanent medical sterility an absolute, closely guarded secret. I was going to quietly let Marcus walk into family court and fight tooth and nail for full custody of my children. I was going to let him formally, legally claim paternity of Jessica and her unborn baby on the official court record. I wanted him to aggressively demand my business assets and $10,000 a month in spousal alimony under the sworn pretense of needing to raise his brand new child. I would let him build a towering, fragile fortress of perjury, fraud, and financial extortion. The higher he climbed on his pathetic ladder of lies, the more devastating his eventual inevitable fall would be. I closed my laptop and smiled. Marcus truly believed he held the ultimate legal leverage. He thought his outrageous demands would force me into a quiet, submissive settlement just to protect my public image and my clients. He had absolutely no idea that he was marching blindly and directly into a ruthless legal slaughterhouse. Exactly 2 weeks later, the day of the first official divorce deposition arrived. I wore a tailored emerald green power suit, walking into the sleek downtown law office of my corporate attorney, with my head held extremely high. The glass conference room was pristine, featuring a long mahogany table and a licensed court reporter sitting quietly in the corner, ready to meticulously transcribe every single word spoken under oath today. I took my designated seat next to my lawyer, placing my leather briefcase gently onto the polished table. Exactly 5 minutes later, the heavy glass doors swung open. Marcus strutted into the room like he owned the entire commercial building. He was wearing a brand new, incredibly expensive gray suit that I knew he had purchased using a high-interest credit card. He flashed a ridiculously smug, wildly overconfident smile in my direction before pulling out a chair. His bottom tier aggressively loud, divorce lawyer sat down beside him, slamming a massive stack of legal demands onto the wood. Marcus looked at me completely convinced that he was about to financially ruin me and strip me of my hard-earned empire. He adjusted his silk tie, leaned back in his leather chair, and stated loudly that he was fully ready to speak on the official legal record. His complete and utter destruction was finally about to begin today. The court reporter adjusted her stenography machine, her fingers hovering over the keys as the deposition officially commenced. Marcus leaned forward, adjusting his expensive tie, radiating an unearned sense of absolute supremacy. My attorney, a ruthless corporate litigator named Valerie, asked him to state his name and swear to tell the truth under the penalty of perjury. Marcus raised his right hand and confidently swore his oath, entirely unaware that the words leaving his mouth were effectively signing his own legal death warrant. For the next 2 grueling hours, I sat in total silence as the man I had supported for a decade wove an elaborate tapestry of lies. Marcus looked directly at the camera, recording the session, and painted himself as the ultimate self-sacrificing modern husband. He testified that he was the original financial backer of my public relations firm. He explicitly claimed that he had used his own savings to purchase our $2 million estate and deliberately stalled his own promising career trajectory purely to allow me the space to shine. According to his sworn testimony, I was a cold opportunist who had drained his resources and then violently discarded his family the moment I achieved corporate success. Valerie just nodded, asking prompting questions that encouraged him to embellish his narrative even further. She was giving him enough rope to hang himself 10 times over. Then came the crescendo of his absolute delusion. Valerie asked him to formally justify his outrageous demand for $10,000 a month in permanent spousal support. Marcus puffed out his chest, looking at me with a sickening display of victimhood. "I am stepping into a new demanding chapter of my life," Marcus stated for the official record, his voice dripping with faux nobility. "My sister-in-law Jessica and I have found solace in each other after suffering years of emotional neglect. She is currently 3 months pregnant with my biological child. I require this financial support to provide a stable environment for my new baby, especially since Kendra has stripped me of the business assets I helped build." He had done it. He had legally, officially, and voluntarily claimed paternity of an unborn child on a sworn court document. I felt a sharp, dangerous thrill course through my veins. Valerie paused deliberately, organizing the neat stack of files resting in front of her. She looked up at Marcus, peering over the rim of her designer glasses with the cold, calculating gaze of an apex predator. "Let us be absolutely clear for the record, Mr. Williams," Valerie said, her voice crisp and unyielding. "You are testifying under oath that you are the biological father of Jessica and her unborn child, and you are demanding financial compensation from my client specifically to support this new dependent. Is that correct?" "That is absolutely correct," Marcus confirmed, a smug, victorious grin spreading across his face. Valerie did not blink. She reached into her thick leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She slid it smoothly across the mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Marcus and his bottom-tier divorce attorney. "I am formally entering Exhibit A into the deposition record," Valerie announced, her tone shifting from polite inquiry to absolute devastation. "Mr. Williams, please review the certified medical document resting in front of you. It is a comprehensive urology report dated exactly 3 years ago, detailing a severe infection that resulted in irreversible reproductive damage. The concluding diagnosis signed by a physician states that you are completely, permanently, and 100% sterile." The color instantly drained from Marcus and his face. He stared at the highlighted text on the medical report, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The smug, arrogant grin vanished, replaced by a look of sheer terror. He looked at me, his eyes wide with desperate panic, finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of the trap he had just blindly walked into. He had committed perjury, he had humiliated himself, and he had just discovered that the woman he destroyed his marriage for was using him to fund another man and his baby. His attorney scrambled desperately, grabbing the paper. "We need a recess," his lawyer shouted, practically knocking over his chair in his haste to halt the proceedings. "This deposition is paused. I need to confer with my client immediately." "Sit down, counselor," Valerie commanded, her voice cracking like a whip through the glass room. "We are absolutely not taking a recess. Your client just spent 2 hours committing egregious documented perjury to extort my client, and we are not even close to being finished." Before Marcus or his panicked lawyer could formulate a single word of protest, Valerie reached back into her leather briefcase. She pulled out a massive 2-inch thick binder filled with highlighted banking ledgers and colorful financial flowcharts. She slammed the heavy binder onto the polished mahogany table with a resounding crash that made Marcus physically flinch in his seat. "I am now formally entering Exhibit B into the official deposition record," Valerie declared, leaning forward with an incredibly sharp, predatory smile. "These are certified offshore bank wire transfers retrieved directly by a licensed forensic accountant. They explicitly prove that while my client was funding your life, you secretly funneled over $150,000 of protected marital assets directly into a private international account belonging to your mistress. Mr. Williams, we are no longer just discussing a simple divorce regarding assets and alimony. We are now discussing multiple counts of severe federal wire fraud. You are going to answer for every single stolen penny right here and right now. This ends today." His impending federal imprisonment finally washed over him in a freezing wave, completely paralyzing his vocal cords. The harsh reality of his own catastrophic greed had just secured his undeniable absolute ruin, while the unblinking video camera continued to quietly record his total permanent destruction inside the very cold corporate boardroom. The heavy silence in the conference room was eventually broken by a ragged sob. Marcus practically collapsed over the mahogany table, his face buried in his shaking hands. The pristine illusion he had crafted of a devoted self-sacrificing husband was shattered, leaving nothing but a shell of a man. He finally understood the gravity of his situation. Jessica had not chosen him because he was special. She had chosen him because he was an easy mark. She had manipulated his need for white validation to drain his finances, all while carrying a child that belonged to a local billionaire. He had traded his wife, his children, and his freedom for a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a bank account. Marcus abruptly lifted his head, his eyes red and frantic. He turned his misdirected rage toward his lawyer, shouting that Jessica had lied to him, manipulated his accounts, and was the true criminal mastermind. He tried to throw his mistress under the legal bus to save his own skin, ignoring the fact that his signature was on every fraudulent wire transfer. His attorney packed up his briefcase, regretting the moment he ever agreed to take this disastrous case. The lawyer advised Marcus to remain silent before he incriminated himself further on the official record. But Marcus was past the point of rational legal strategy. The panic of federal prison time was rapidly consuming his last shreds of common sense. He pushed his chair back and scrambled around the large table, dropping to his knees directly in front of me. "Kendra, please," Marcus begged, tears streaming down his face as he reached for my hands. I pulled my hands away, instantly resting them safely in my lap. "You have to stop this. We have 10 years of history together. We built a family. I made a terrible mistake, but I am still the father of your children. Please, for the sake of Malik and Zuri, you cannot send me to federal prison. They need their father. You know how much I love them. You cannot let them grow up knowing their dad is locked in a cage." I looked down at the pathetic, weeping man kneeling on the carpet. He had the audacity to invoke the names of my children to save himself from the consequences of his own repulsive greed. A cold, unyielding rage hardened my heart permanently, sealing off any lingering trace of sympathy I might have held for him. "Do not you dare speak their names in this room," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "You do not care about Malik and Zuri. If you actually cared about your children, you would not have filed a malicious anonymous report with Child Protective Services, trying to have them forcibly removed from their safe home. You tried to weaponize the state against a black mother out of pure spite, knowing exactly how dangerous that system can be for families like ours. You were perfectly willing to traumatize your own son and daughter just to secure a better financial settlement for your white mistress. You lost the absolute privilege of calling yourself their father the second you picked up that phone and made that lying complaint. Marcus flinched violently, unable to deny the undeniable truth. He knew exactly what he had done, and he knew I possessed the documentation to prove his malicious intent. He had gambled his entire family on a losing hand, and the house was collecting its massive debt today. Valerie stood up, towering over his kneeling, trembling figure. "The deposition is officially concluded," she announced to the court reporter, who nodded and swiftly stopped typing. Valerie turned her sharp attention back to Marcus and his defeated legal counsel. "My office is submitting Exhibit A and Exhibit B directly to the presiding family court judge this afternoon. Furthermore, we are filing an emergency motion holding Mr. Williams entirely liable for the severe dissipation of marital assets. We are demanding full restitution of the stolen $150,000 plus applicable legal interest. If those funds are not restored to my client within 30 days, we will forward these certified wire transfers directly to the federal authorities for immediate criminal prosecution." Marcus slumped backward onto the floor. The absolute reality of his complete financial and legal destruction finally crushing the remaining breath from his lungs. He was facing total bankruptcy, severe public humiliation, and the terrifying threat of a lengthy federal prison sentence. He had absolutely no savings left, no high-paying career to fall back on, and zero leverage remaining in the divorce proceedings. I stood up from my leather chair, smoothed out my emerald green power suit, and walked out of the glass conference room without offering him a single backward glance. I was officially nothing more than collateral damage in my rearview mirror. But desperate men are incredibly dangerous creatures, especially when they are backed into a pitch-black, inescapable corner. Marcus knew he had exactly 30 days to produce a massive amount of cash to avoid criminal indictment. He could not turn to Jessica, who blocked his number the moment her billionaire lover cut her off. He certainly could not turn to his brother David, who currently wanted him dead. The only person left in his fractured world who would blindly support him was his highly delusional mother. Late that night, parked inside a dark alleyway, Marcus pulled out his laptop and accessed a specific financial portal. 3 years ago, when his credit was decent, he legally co-signed the mortgage on Brenda and her suburban house. She trusted him implicitly, viewing him as her successful son. Now suffocated by his mounting legal fees and the threat of federal prison, Marcus made his most despicable choice yet. With a few rapid keystrokes, he secretly initiated a massive remortgage on his mother and her primary residence, stealing her retirement safety net without her having a clue. Marcus and his desperate financial betrayal remained completely hidden in the digital shadows as Sunday morning dawned bright and clear over the bustling city. While he was frantically pacing his tiny rented apartment, desperately trying to cover his digital tracks and figure out how to access the stolen equity from the second mortgage he had just secretly initiated on his mother and her primary residence, she was blissfully unaware. Instead, his mother was incredibly busy preparing for her favorite weekly performance. Mount Zion Baptist Church was packed to the absolute brim, with congregants dressed in their Sunday best. The air was thick with the suffocating scent of expensive floral perfumes and the low, constant hum of eager neighborhood gossip. Brenda sat proudly in the front row, wearing an elaborate lavender hat that she had specifically purchased just to draw attention to herself. When the senior pastor officially opened the floor for the congregation to share their weekly testimonies, Brenda practically leaped out of her cushioned wooden seat. She grabbed the wireless microphone from the nearest usher with practiced dramatic flair, slowly turning around to face the packed sanctuary with a deeply sorrowful expression. "Brothers and sisters, I come before you today with a very heavy heart," Brenda announced, her voice wavering with perfectly orchestrated manipulative sorrow. "I am asking this entire congregation to please lift up a special urgent prayer for my lost daughter-in-law, Kendra. Her spirit has been completely hardened by corporate greed and selfish pride. She has turned her back on her holy vows and abandoned my sweet devoted son during his time of need. I ask that the Lord strips away her massive vanity and teaches her the true meaning of humble submission before her aggressive, unyielding nature destroys our beautiful family completely. The congregation murmured in sympathetic agreement, nodding their heads along as Brenda carefully wiped a single fake tear from her cheek. She was entirely in her element, weaponizing the sacred pulpit to assassinate my character, while simultaneously securing the collective pity of her peers. She truly believed her fabricated narrative was absolutely bulletproof inside these sacred walls. What Brenda did not know was that I had not spent my beautiful Sunday morning hiding in quiet, defeated shame. I usually avoided this highly toxic, judgmental environment, strictly refusing to participate in the hypocritical pageantry that ultimately defined Brenda and her superficial social circle. But today was entirely different. I was not going to let her control the narrative for another second. The heavy oak double doors at the very back of the sanctuary swung open with a loud, resounding thud that instantly cut through the soft organ music. Every single head in the large building turned rapidly toward the main entrance. I walked straight down the center aisle, dressed impeccably in a tailored, brilliant ivory suit, my high heels clicking sharply and rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I did not shrink away, and I certainly did not lower my gaze to the ground. I maintained absolute unwavering eye contact with Brenda as her smug, theatrical expression rapidly dissolved into sheer, unadulterated panic. The supportive murmurs of this congregation died, instantly replaced by a thick, suffocating silence that filled the entire room with electric anticipation. I did not stop walking until I reached the front of the altar steps. I smoothly reached out and took the wireless microphone right out of Brenda and her trembling hand. I did not scream and I did not raise my voice in anger. I simply smiled politely at the massive sea of staring faces waiting eagerly for my response. "Good morning, Mount Zion," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive overhead speakers. "I completely agree with Brenda today. We absolutely need to pray for her right now. But we should be praying for a very different reason. We need to pray for her because she is about to be entirely homeless. Her sweet, devoted son, Marcus, just secretly took out a massive second mortgage on her primary residence last night. He stole her entire retirement safety net without telling her, simply because he is drowning in massive debt to pay for his high-priced divorce lawyers." Loud gasps began to ripple through the crowded front rows, but I was not even close to finished. "He desperately needs that stolen money to cover up the fact that he has been draining his bank accounts for over a year." I continued pacing slowly across the altar to ensure everyone heard every single word. "Marcus has been funding a luxury hotel affair with his own brother and his white wife, Jessica. He gave her absolutely everything while David was completely oblivious." The entire church erupted into absolute pandemonium. Women shouted out loud, tightly clutching their Sunday programs, as the horrifying truth echoed through the sacred halls. "And the absolute best part," I added, looking directly at David, who was sitting in the second row, looking paralyzed by the devastating revelation, "is that the baby Jessica is currently carrying does not even belong to Marcus. He is completely sterile due to an untreated infection. He literally cannot be the biological father." Brenda let out a loud, piercing shriek before her eyes rolled back into her head, and she fainted dead away, right onto the carpeted altar floor. David stormed the pulpit, his face twisted with pure, blinding rage, ready to physically attack anyone standing in his direct path. But before he could even reach the top of the short stairs, his cell phone rang loudly from his suit jacket pocket, halting him completely in his tracks. He froze in place, slowly pulling the vibrating device out to check the glowing screen. The caller identification flashed the name of Harrison Sterling, the powerful billionaire rival, calling to personally confirm the definitive DNA paternity test that had just been mysteriously leaked directly to the local press. The fragile walls of their false empire were finally caving in on them all today. David stood completely frozen on the second step of the altar. The heavy silence in the sanctuary was broken only by the tinny, faint sound of Harrison Sterling speaking through the phone speaker. I could not hear the exact words the billionaire was saying, but I did not need to. The sheer horror washing over David and his face painted a vivid picture. He slowly lowered the device, his eyes darting frantically toward his brother. Marcus was still standing near the front pew, looking like a cornered animal desperately searching for an escape route. The congregation watched with bated breath as David let out a guttural, agonizing scream. He lunged forward, clearing the remaining steps in a single bound. "You slept with my wife," David roared, his voice echoing violently off the stained glass windows. "And she is pregnant with another man. You threw away your entire life. You stole our mother and her house. And you did it all for a woman who was playing you for an absolute fool." Marcus tried to scramble backward, but he tripped over the wooden hymnal rack. David grabbed him by the collar of his expensive fraud-funded suit jacket and dragged him violently down the center aisle. Ushers yelled for order, but nobody dared step between the two brothers. They burst through the heavy double doors of the sanctuary, stumbling out into the bright, hot asphalt of the church parking lot. I followed closely behind the panicked crowd of churchgoers, maintaining a safe, calculated distance. David threw a heavy right hook that connected squarely with Marcus in his jaw. Marcus stumbled backward into the side of a parked minivan, spitting blood onto the pavement. "I did everything right," David screamed, delivering another vicious blow to his younger brother and his ribs. "I was the successful one. I married the wealthy woman. I brought prestige to this family. And you ruined it. You ruined all of it." This violent, pathetic display was the culmination of 30 years of deep systemic dysfunction. For their entire lives, David and Marcus had competed relentlessly for Brenda and her toxic approval. Brenda pitted them against each other constantly, comparing their salaries, their choices in women, and their perceived social statuses. Marcus lived in a perpetual state of inadequacy, desperate to outshine the golden child. He thought stealing David and his supposedly elite wife would finally crown him the ultimate victor. He wanted to parade Jessica around as his ultimate prize, completely oblivious to the fact that she was nothing more than a highly manipulative parasite. Now the two brothers were physically destroying each other on holy ground, shedding blood over a fraudulent white woman who had successfully used them both to finance her designer wardrobe. The illusion of their perfect, respectable family was officially permanently dead. They were exposed as a bankrupt, morally bankrupt, and legally compromised mess. I watched them tear their false brotherhood apart, knowing they entirely deserved this brutal, agonizing reality check. I did not stay to watch the local police arrive. I walked calmly to my luxury sport utility vehicle, the exact one I had paid for in cash, and climbed into the plush leather driver's seat. I rolled up the darkly tinted windows, creating an impenetrable barrier between my peace and their absolute chaos. Through the glass, I watched Marcus tackle David to the ground, the two men rolling over the hot asphalt, while the church deacons frantically tried to pull them apart. Brenda was being carried out the front doors by two usher nurses, a cold compress pressed against her forehead as she wailed into the morning sky. I started my engine, feeling a profound, undeniable sense of liberation. I shifted the car into drive and slowly pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the trash to completely take itself out. I had a final family court hearing to attend, and I refused to be late for my own total victory. The court hearing later that afternoon was a swift, merciless legal execution, with Marcus entirely absent due to his sudden arrest for public affray and disturbing the peace. The judge quickly finalized the emergency asset protection orders. I successfully secured full, unyielding legal control over all of my corporate holdings. But Marcus was a man operating purely on the dangerous fumes of extreme desperation. He was facing federal prison for wire fraud, total financial bankruptcy, and the utter destruction of his public identity. He knew the certified bank ledgers resting in my possession were the final, irrefutable nails in his coffin. He could not afford a competent defense attorney, and he certainly could not afford to let me hand those unredacted files over to the federal authorities. Later that night, the city was shrouded in heavy, suffocating darkness. Marcus, having just bailed himself out of the county holding cell, using the last remnants of his stolen funds, made the most disastrous decision of his entire miserable life. He drove a rented sedan to the towering glass building that housed my premier public relations firm. He parked in the rear loading dock, slipping past the exterior security gates with a stolen keycard he had secretly copied months ago. He believed he was outsmarting me. He thought he could break into my executive suite, locate the physical hard drives, holding the embezzlement evidence, and destroy them before the sun came up. He crept through the dark, quiet corridors, a heavy metal crowbar gripped tightly in his sweating hands. He approached the frosted glass door of my corner office, entirely convinced that destroying my data was his only remaining path to freedom. He slowly raised the cold iron tool, preparing to shatter the expensive lock and erase his horrific financial crimes forever. His desperate heart pounded wildly against his ribcage as he gripped the polished door handle, completely unaware of the devastating, life-altering surprise waiting patiently for him on the other side of the dark wood door. Marcus did not even need to swing the heavy iron crowbar to breach the perimeter of my inner sanctuary. The frosted glass door yielded with a surprisingly soft click as he turned the polished handle, slipping into the pitch-black office like a desperate thief in the night. He stepped onto the plush carpet, his chest heaving with erratic, panicked breaths. He truly believed he had orchestrated the perfect corporate infiltration. In his highly delusional mind, he was executing a masterful tactical maneuver, relying on the toxic, archaic advice his own father had drilled into his head decades ago. A real man does whatever it takes to win, no matter who has to be crushed in the process. He clung to that pathetic philosophy, entirely convinced that he could outsmart a professional crisis management executive in her own corporate headquarters. He assumed my security protocols were as weak and disorganized as his own miserable life. He moved quickly through the shadows, using the faint illumination of his cell phone flashlight to navigate the expansive modern office. He bypassed the sleek reception desk and headed straight for the primary filing cabinets lining the far wall. He was frantically searching for the physical printed files regarding Richard and his massive Securities and Exchange Commission violations, alongside the unredacted ledgers of his own federal wire fraud. He violently yanked the metal drawers open, tossing pristine, organized folders onto the floor in a frantic, sweaty rage. He was looking for any tangible document that connected him to Jessica and her fraudulent offshore accounts. When he could not immediately locate the specific red folders holding his definitive doom, his panic mutated into reckless, unadulterated aggression. He raised the heavy iron crowbar above his head and brought it crashing down onto my assistant and her dual computer monitors. The expensive glass shattered instantly, raining sharp, jagged pieces across the polished desk. He swung again, obliterating a digital scanner, foolishly believing that destroying physical hardware would somehow magically erase the digital footprint of his horrific financial crimes. He smashed a presentation screen, breathing heavily as he destroyed everything in his immediate path. He genuinely thought he was winning this particular battle. I was panting heavily, sweat dripping from his forehead, when the overhead fluorescent light snapped on with a loud, blinding flash. The sudden, intense illumination flooded the entire executive suite, completely exposing the pathetic, destructive spectacle he had just created. Marcus froze instantly, dropping the heavy crowbar to the carpet with a dull thud. He slowly turned around, throwing his hands up to shield his eyes from the harsh, unforgiving brightness. I was sitting comfortably at the head of my long mahogany conference table, my hands resting neatly on the polished wood. I was not alone. Flanking me on my left and right were two highly trained, heavily armed private security contractors. Standing directly behind my leather chair were three uniformed city police officers, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts as they assessed the violent scene. I watched Marcus tremble, his eyes darting frantically around the bright, inescapable trap he had just blindly walked into. He looked absolutely pathetic. You really thought you could break into a premier corporate crisis management firm with a stolen key card and a crowbar? I said, my voice echoing clearly across the ruined office space. You destroyed about $4,000 worth of replaceable hardware, Marcus. But you did not destroy a single piece of evidence. Every financial ledger, every offshore wire transfer, and every single document detailing Richard and his embezzlement scandal is securely backed up on a heavily encrypted, off-site federal cloud server. We do not keep physical copies of high-level criminal evidence in a basic desk drawer. You are living in the dark ages, relying on brute force to solve intellectual problems. It is incredibly embarrassing to witness. The lead police officer stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. Marcus Williams, You are under arrest for commercial burglary, corporate espionage, and malicious destruction of private property. The officer announced, his deep voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or argument. Place your hands behind your back immediately. Marcus stumbled backward, hitting the ruined desk. The reality of his situation crashed into him like a runaway freight train. He was already facing severe federal wire fraud charges. And now he had just committed multiple state-level felonies right in front of 3 active-duty law enforcement officers. There was no talking his way out of this. There was no mother to hide behind, and no golden child brother to deflect the blame onto. He was entirely, utterly alone. He had absolutely nothing left to save him from this catastrophic failure. The 2 younger officers grabbed his arms, spinning him around and slamming him forcefully against the wall. The metallic click of the handcuffs securing his wrists sounded like the ultimate definitive closing of his free life. "You planned this!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated terror as he thrashed helplessly against the officers. "You left the door unlocked on purpose. You wanted me to break in. You set me up to take the fall for everything. You are a monster, Kendra. You planned this entire trap." I stood up from my leather executive chair, smoothing out my impeccably tailored suit jacket. I walked slowly across the ruined room, my heels clicking sharply against the floor, stopping just inches away from his sweating, terrified face. The police officers held him firmly in place, allowing me the perfect, unhindered moment to deliver my final, devastating blow to his broken spirit. I looked directly into his wide, panicked eyes, savoring the absolute destruction of his massive, incredibly fragile male ego. I knew he was finally realizing the immense gravity of his colossal mistakes. I leaned in close, a cold, victorious smile spreading effortlessly across my face as I watched him tremble in absolute defeat. "You forgot your place," I whispered. I stepped back, letting the uniformed officers drag Marcus out of my ruined executive suite. The metallic clinking of his handcuffs echoed down the long corporate hallway, completely drowning out his frantic, pathetic excuses. I was finally gone, and the real devastation was only just beginning to unfold. The very next morning, the financial world woke up to an absolute earthquake. By 7 o'clock, every major local news station, digital media outlet, and national business network was broadcasting breaking, unprecedented coverage. Federal agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission, flanked heavily by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, simultaneously raided the towering downtown headquarters of Richard and his fraudulent investment firm. News helicopters circled closely above the massive glass building, capturing high-definition aerial footage of federal agents carrying out dozens of heavy cardboard boxes filled with incriminating financial ledgers, encrypted hard drives, and falsified tax records. Richard, the arrogant patriarch, who had threatened to completely ruin my business just days prior, was officially indicted on 47 counts of severe federal wire fraud, mass corporate embezzlement, and running a sprawling, highly coordinated Ponzi scheme. I was handcuffed and paraded in front of flashing cameras, his expensive designer suit looking completely ridiculous, as they pushed him into the back of a federal vehicle. The majestic, supposedly untouchable Sterling family empire was exposed to the entire world as nothing more than a spectacular, rapidly decaying mountain of stolen pension funds and heavily leveraged debt. Their generational wealth was a complete, absolute fiction. The sheer magnitude of the sudden federal raid created a massive, inescapable shockwave across every social media platform. Within hours, sharp internet sleuths and aggressive investigative journalists connected the massive corporate fraud directly to Jessica. Her tearful, highly manipulative video from our anniversary night abruptly resurfaced on every single digital timeline. But this time, the public response was violently different. The same internet commentators who had previously offered her their blind, unverified sympathy were now ripping her apart piece by piece. They relentlessly dissected her fake foam neck brace, loudly mocked her completely fabricated white victimhood, and aggressively exposed the blatant, disgusting racial bias embedded deeply in her original complaint. The online community ruthlessly dragged her through the digital mud, pointing out the absolute hypocrisy of her actions. They noted that while she was sitting on a bed, sobbing about an imaginary assault by a highly successful black woman, her own father was actively robbing elderly, hardworking employees of their entire life savings. The internet officially permanently canceled Jessica Sterling. Thousands of users flooded her comment sections, calling out her toxic entitlement and demanding she apologize. She was entirely stripped of her fake elite status and publicly branded as the ultimate, pathetic scam artist. She was forced to hastily delete all of her social media accounts, effectively erasing her entire digital existence to escape the overwhelming, thoroughly justified public backlash. I did not sit back and simply let the media dictate the narrative surrounding my public relations agency. I am a premier corporate crisis manager, and I know exactly how to expertly control a massive media storm before it ever touches my pristine reputation. I walked into my temporary boardroom, completely ignoring the shattered glass and broken hardware Marcus had foolishly left behind on the carpet, and drafted a flawless masterclass public statement. I released the official press packet to every major news outlet, financial blog, and local newspaper in the city this morning. In the carefully worded statement, I confirmed that my agency had been hired through a blind proxy to conduct an independent investigation into the Sterling Corporation. I clearly outlined that the very moment my dedicated team uncovered definitive, irrefutable proof of severe financial crimes, I immediately terminated the contract and forwarded all documented evidence directly to federal regulatory authorities. I did not mention Marcus, and I certainly did not mention Jessica. I completely distanced my thriving firm from their pathetic, rapidly sinking ship. The brilliant strategy worked flawlessly. Instead of being dragged down into the messy, chaotic family scandal, my corporate reputation absolutely skyrocketed. Industry leaders publicly praised my ruthless, unwavering ethics and my immediate commitment to corporate transparency. I was publicly cemented as a powerhouse executive who cleans house efficiently, even when that particular house happens to intersect with her own personal life. My agency secured 3 new massive corporate retainers from high-profile clients before the business day even concluded. I had successfully turned a potential public relations nightmare into the most lucrative, brilliant marketing campaign of my entire professional career. I was sitting at my large mahogany desk later that afternoon, comfortably reviewing the new, highly lucrative contracts on my laptop when my office telephone rang loudly. The digital caller identification displayed a blocked local number. I answered it fully, expecting another ambitious journalist begging for an exclusive television interview about the federal raid. Instead, I heard the jarring, unmistakable sound of loud, desperate, ragged sobbing coming through the receiver. It was Brenda. Her usual arrogant, deeply judgmental tone was completely gone, entirely replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror and absolute desperation. "Kendra, please, you have to help me," Brenda wailed through the receiver, her breath hitching uncontrollably as she cried out in fear. "The bank just taped a bright yellow foreclosure notice right onto my front door. The property manager said Marcus secretly remortgaged my house behind my own back, and the payments are severely delinquent. They are taking my home." "Kendra," the sheriff said, "I only have a few short weeks to completely vacate the premises. I have absolutely nowhere else in this world to go. David will not answer my calls, and Marcus is locked in a jail cell. Please, I am begging you on my bare hands and knees today. Let me move into your guest room. I just want to see my beautiful grandchildren, Malik and Zuri. Please do not leave me out on the cold, unforgiving street to suffer like this and freeze completely alone in the dark." I instructed Brenda to meet me at my front gate the following morning, promising I had something prepared for her transition. When her rusted sedan pulled into my circular driveway, I was already standing on the sprawling marble porch of my $2 million estate. Malik and Zuri were sitting on the porch steps tying their shoes for a weekend field trip. Brenda practically threw her car door open. She scurried up the manicured walkway, her eyes completely bloodshot and her clothes wrinkled. She looked nothing like the arrogant, judgmental matriarch who used to parade around the country club. She reached out her trembling arms, attempting to bypass me entirely to grab my children. "Oh, my sweet, beautiful grandbabies!" Brenda cried out, her voice dripping with artificial saccharine affection as she lunged toward them. Grandma has missed you both so much. Grandma is coming to stay with you for a little while so we can be a real family again. I swiftly stepped squarely between Brenda and my children, holding up a firm, unyielding hand to halt her frantic advance. Malik Zuri, please go back inside the house and wait in the foyer, I commanded softly but with absolute authority. My children, sensing the heavy tension radiating from my posture, immediately grabbed their backpacks and retreated safely behind the heavy oak door. I turned my full cold attention back to the weeping woman standing on my expensive porch. You do not get to use my children as emotional leverage, Brenda, I stated, my voice echoing sharply across the quiet, affluent neighborhood. You have not called them once in the past month. You completely ignored their existence while you were busy parading Jessica and her illegitimate fraudulent pregnancy around your church sanctuary. You only remembered you had a grandson and a granddaughter when the bank securely fastened a bright yellow foreclosure notice to your front door. Brenda recoiled as if I had struck her. She clutched her chest, attempting to deploy her signature manipulation tactic of overwhelming manufactured physical distress. How can you be so incredibly heartless, Kendra? She wailed, tears spilling down her weathered cheeks. I am your family. I am the mother of the man you married. I am a vulnerable elderly woman who is about to be thrown out onto the unforgiving street because my own son deceived me. You have a massive mansion with empty guest rooms. It is your Christian duty to open your home to me during my time of absolute devastation. I stared down at her, completely immune to her pathetic, highly weaponized tears. I reached into my tailored blazer pocket and pulled out a neatly folded stack of thick, crisp white papers. I remember a very different version of your so-called Christian duty, Brenda, I said, taking a deliberate step closer to her shaking figure. I vividly recall the exact night of my 10th anniversary dinner. I remember standing in my own formal dining room, the house that my corporate paycheck purchased, bleeding from a violent, unprovoked physical assault committed by your white daughter-in-law, when Jessica slapped me across the face for having the audacity to serve myself a lobster tail first. You did not offer me a single ounce of grace or protection. Brenda swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward the pristine front lawn. That was a high-stress situation, she stammered weakly. Things were moving so fast and I was just trying to keep the peace between you girls. You did not try to keep the peace, I corrected her, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. You immediately pointed your finger at me and weaponized the most vile racist stereotypes imaginable. You called me an aggressive, ungrateful black woman. You publicly shamed me for showing strength, openly defending the deceitful white woman who had just assaulted me in my own home. You hated my financial independence because it constantly reminded you of how deeply mediocre your own sons truly are. You celebrated Jessica because her fake proximity to wealth validated your pathetic social climbing fantasies. You gleefully watched me walk out of that door with my children, fully expecting me to return begging on my knees. Brenda began to sob violently, finally grasping the absolute finality of her horrific choices. I was wrong, Kendra. I was so completely and entirely wrong. Please, I am begging you to show me some mercy. I have absolutely nothing left. Marcus destroyed my entire life. Marcus did exactly what you raised him to do, I replied without a single shred of sympathy. He stole, he lied, and he completely obliterated his family for a cheap thrill. You enabled his toxic entitlement his entire life, and now you are experiencing the direct catastrophic consequences of your own terrible parenting. I unfolded the stack of papers I was holding and extended my hand, pressing the documents firmly into her trembling chest. Brenda looked down at the sheets, her tear-filled eyes struggling to read the bold black text. What is this? She whispered, her voice cracking with sheer panic. That is a comprehensive printed list of low-income housing apartments and heavily subsidized state shelters located within the greater metropolitan area. I announced, my voice ringing with total unadulterated victory. I highlighted the facilities that currently have open availability for emergency placements. You made your bed, Brenda. You chose to support and uplift Jessica. You chose to protect a parasite over the woman who funded your entire existence. So let Jessica house you. Let her fake old money family pay your rent. Brenda stared blindly at the cheap housing brochures in her trembling hands. Her legs suddenly gave out entirely beneath her weak body. She collapsed helplessly, falling to her knees right on my imported marble porch and wailed. I turned around and firmly pulled my heavy oak door shut, locking it securely. Suddenly, my cell phone rang. It was a collect call from the county jail. The automated voice of the county correctional facility echoed through my phone speaker, asking if I would accept a collect call from an inmate. I pressed the number 1 on my keypad, leaning back against the marble counter of my pristine kitchen. The line clicked, connecting me to the cold, echoing reality of the local jail. "Kendra, thank God you answered." Marcus sobbed into the receiver, his voice cracking with a level of raw, unfiltered panic I had never heard from him before. He sounded entirely broken, stripped of every single ounce of the arrogant bravado he had paraded around the deposition room just hours earlier. "Please, you have to get me out of here. It is an absolute nightmare in this holding cell. I cannot survive in this horrific place. I will do absolutely anything you want. I will sign whatever divorce papers your lawyer puts in front of me tonight. I will completely drop my ridiculous claim to your public relations firm. I will walk away from the house without a fight. Just please call a bondsman and post my bail right now." I listened to his frantic, pathetic begging, feeling absolutely nothing but a deep, profound sense of vindication. He was desperately trying to negotiate with currency he no longer possessed. He genuinely believed that his signature on a piece of paper still held some kind of supreme value. I took a slow, deliberate breath, enjoying the sound of his weeping over the secure phone line. "You do not have anything left to bargain with, Marcus." I stated, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of sympathy. "You already lost your claim to my company the second you committed federal wire fraud. You lost your claim to my house 3 years ago when you signed that post-nuptial agreement. You are offering me concessions for battles I have already definitively won." Marcus choked on a sob, his desperation rapidly mutating into the familiar toxic manipulation he had used throughout our entire 10-year marriage. He realized that financial negotiations were completely useless, so he immediately pivoted to his ultimate emotional weapon. "Kendra, you cannot leave me rotting in here like some common street criminal." Marcus pleaded, his tone shifting into a whiny, defensive pitch. "I am still the father of your children. Malik and Zuri need me. You cannot let your own flesh and blood see their dad locked up in an orange jumpsuit. Think about the severe psychological damage you are doing to our family by keeping me locked in this cage. You have made your point. You won round 1. But you are a mother first. You have a moral obligation to protect our kids from the trauma of having an incarcerated father. You have to post this bail for their sake, not mine." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this man was genuinely breathtaking. He was attempting to gaslight me from behind steel bars. He wanted me to feel a deep sense of maternal guilt for a criminal situation. He had entirely orchestrated himself by breaking into my corporate office with a heavy iron crowbar. He expected me to shield him from the very consequences he had aggressively chased. I gripped the edge of my marble counter, my posture straightening as a cold, righteous fury settled over my spirit. "Do not ever invoke the well-being of my children to save your own pathetic skin." I commanded, my words cutting through the phone line like a sharpened blade. "You permanently forfeited your right to call yourself their father the exact moment you picked up a telephone and filed a malicious, fraudulent report with Child Protective Services. You actively tried to have my innocent babies ripped from their safe, loving home and thrown into the foster care system just to secure a better financial settlement for your white mistress. You did not care about their psychological trauma then, and you certainly do not care about it now." Marcus fell completely silent on the other end of the line. The heavy, suffocating weight of his unforgivable actions was finally catching up to him. "Furthermore, you do not need to worry about Malik and Zuri ever seeing you in an orange jumpsuit." I continued, delivering the ultimate legal strike. "My corporate attorney filed an emergency ex parte motion with the family court judge this afternoon. Given your active felony indictments for commercial burglary, corporate espionage, and massive federal wire fraud, combined with the documented proof of your malicious stunt with Child Protective Services," the judge did not hesitate for a single second. I have already been granted full sole physical and legal custody of both of our children. Your parental rights have been entirely suspended. You are legally prohibited from contacting them. A loud, agonizing wail erupted from Marcus. It was the devastating, undeniable sound of a highly arrogant man realizing that his entire existence had been thoroughly and completely dismantled. He had lost his fake wealthy mistress, his enabling family, his freedom, and now his own children. Kendra, please! Marcus screamed, his voice dissolving into a frantic, hyperventilating screech. You cannot do this to me. My bail is only set at $50,000. I know you have that cash sitting right in your checking account. You have to transfer it. If I stay in here, they are going to transfer me to the federal holding facility. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. Just pay the $50,000. I smiled, looking out the large windows of my luxurious kitchen toward the beautiful, peaceful neighborhood I had conquered. I do have exactly $50,000 sitting in my primary checking account. Marcus, I replied, my tone dripping with absolute ruthless satisfaction. But I am not giving a single penny of it to the county court system. Instead, I am using that exact amount of money to take Malik and Zuri on a highly exclusive first-class vacation to Paris next week. We will enjoy it. I disconnected the call, leaving Marcus to scream his desperate pleas into the cold walls of the county jail. My promise of a Parisian vacation was not a bluff. For 2 weeks, I took Malik and Zuri across the ocean, shielding them from the chaotic implosion of their father and his toxic relatives. We ate pastries under the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, completely untouched by the legal storm brewing back home. By the time we returned to our peaceful $2 million estate, the dust had settled, and the final stage of my victory was set in motion. The morning of our divorce hearing arrived with a crisp breeze. I walked into the grand courthouse wearing a striking crimson suit that commanded absolute respect from everyone in the room. Marcus was escorted into the courtroom wearing a faded orange jumpsuit. His wrists were secured with heavy steel chains, and his arrogant posture was entirely gone. He shuffled slowly to the defendant table, looking haggard and utterly defeated. His bottom-tier lawyer sat as far away as physically possible, clearly embarrassed to be associated with such a spectacular failure. I sat comfortably beside my corporate attorney Valerie, opening my leather briefcase with a quiet sense of profound satisfaction. Judge Montgomery, a stern woman with zero tolerance for manipulation, took her seat at the high bench. She did not waste a single second on pleasantries. She opened the massive, heavily documented file Valerie had submitted and directed her piercing, furious gaze straight at my soon-to-be ex-husband. Mr. Williams, in my 20 years presiding over family court, I have rarely encountered a sequence of events as repulsive as yours. Judge Montgomery announced, her voice echoing like thunder across the silent courtroom. You sat in a sworn deposition and committed blatant documented perjury. You boldly claimed you were a devoted self-sacrificing provider while secretly funneling massive amounts of protected marital assets directly to your mistress. Furthermore, and most disgustingly, you attempted to weaponize child protective services against an upstanding, highly successful mother out of pure malicious spite. You tried to throw your own innocent children into the system simply to gain financial leverage in a divorce. That is not the behavior of a father. That is the behavior of a desperate, vindictive coward. Marcus lowered his head in utter shame, staring blankly at his chained hands resting on the wooden table. He had absolutely no defense. The certified offshore bank ledgers, the hidden security camera footage, and the medical document proving his absolute sterility had completely destroyed his entire fabricated narrative. He had foolishly tried to paint me as an aggressive, gold-digging career woman, but the undeniable paper trail proved that I was the sole financial engine of his entire, pathetic existence. I am officially finalizing this divorce decree immediately, Judge Montgomery declared, slamming her heavy wooden gavel onto the sounding block. Kendra Williams shall retain 100% sole ownership of her public relations firm, the primary residential estate, and all associated corporate assets. Mr. Williams, your outrageous demands for spousal alimony and business equity are entirely denied with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am holding you strictly liable for the severe dissipation of marital assets. You are hereby ordered to fully repay the stolen $150,000 to your former wife. Since you are currently facing lengthy federal incarceration for your separate wire fraud charges, this massive debt will be enforced through aggressive permanent wage garnishment, the very second you are eventually released and secure any form of legal employment. You will pay her back every single penny. It was a total absolute legal slaughter. I had not just won the battle, I had completely obliterated his entire future. As the armed bailiffs moved to escort Marcus back to his miserable holding cell, he did not even try to look at me. His arrogant spirit was permanently broken. My magnificent victory extended far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The massive fallout from the federal raid on the Sterling family empire had completely leveled Jessica and her fake elite reality. Her billionaire lover, desperate to distance himself from the toxic Securities and Exchange Commission scandal, immediately cut all ties with her. He canceled the expensive lease on her luxury apartment, repossessed the designer vehicles he had purchased for her, and legally washed his hands of her illegitimate pregnancy entirely. With her fraudulent father facing decades in federal prison and all of her secret offshore accounts frozen by the government, Jessica was left with absolutely nothing. Just yesterday, my reliable assistant Tanya sent me a photograph taken by a former corporate client. It showed Jessica stripped entirely of her expensive designer clothes and her arrogant old money attitude wearing a cheap polyester uniform. She was working the cash register at a minimum wage retail store in a dilapidated strip mall, struggling to ring up basic grocery items. The entitled woman who had violently slapped me for serving myself first was now spending her long days bagging cheap merchandise for minimum wage. I sat at the mahogany table in the quiet courtroom, holding a sleek silver fountain pen. Valerie slid the final binding divorce decree across the smooth wood. I did not hesitate for a single second. I pressed the expensive pen to the thick parchment paper, but I did not sign the last name I had carried for the past 10 years. During the swift legal proceedings, I had successfully petitioned the court for a formal name change. I signed my beautiful original maiden name with a massive, elegant flourish. I officially erased Marcus Brenda David and their deeply toxic parasitic legacy from my entire identity forever. I handed the signed document back to my attorney, feeling a massive invisible weight completely vanish from my tired shoulders. I was no longer a Williams. I was Kendra. I stood up from the wooden table, grabbing my leather briefcase, and walked purposefully toward the heavy courtroom doors. Pushing through the heavy oak double doors, I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, taking my first unburdened breath as a truly free woman. Exactly 1 year has passed since that defining afternoon at the courthouse, and my life is completely unrecognizable. Tonight, the sparkling crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom at the luxury hotel cast a brilliant warm glow across the sprawling elegant room. I am hosting my inaugural charity gala, a massive philanthropic event dedicated to funding ambitious minority women entrepreneurs. I stand near the main stage wearing a custom-tailored striking gold evening gown that catches the light with every single movement. I look absolutely stunning, but more importantly, I am visibly glowing with a profound, unshakable inner peace. My public relations firm has doubled in size, effortlessly securing massive international contracts and absolutely dominating the corporate crisis management industry. My beautiful children Malik and Zuri are thriving. They are enrolled in a prestigious, highly secure private academy, completely shielded from the toxic dramatic chaos that once threatened to consume their innocent childhoods. They spend their weekends happily playing in our massive backyard, learning multiple languages, and experiencing a life overflowing with genuine love and stable, consistent support. They do not ask about the deceitful people who tried to destroy us, because those individuals simply do not exist in our peaceful universe anymore. They are entirely safe and they are incredibly loved. As I watch successful, highly ambitious women mingle and network across the lavish ballroom, I take a quiet personal moment to reflect on the violent altercation that completely derailed my former existence. I think about the sharp, stinging slap Jessica delivered across my cheek at my 10th anniversary dinner. For a brief, terrifying moment back then, I actually thought my entire world was rapidly collapsing. I now realize with absolute clarity that the stinging slap was never a devastating tragedy. It was the ultimate divine wake-up call. It was the exact necessary catalyst I desperately needed to finally stop shrinking myself, just to make mediocre parasitic people feel comfortable. I had spent an entire decade making myself incredibly small, hiding my fierce corporate ambition and deliberately downplaying my hard-earned wealth just to soothe the extremely fragile ego of a deeply insecure man. I foolishly bankrolled a toxic family that secretly despised my blackness, my undeniable success, and my unwavering independence. I generously allowed them to sit at my expensive dining table and greedily feast on my intense labor while they quietly plotted my ultimate downfall. That physical strike to my face shattered that suffocating, dangerous illusion forever. It forcefully reminded me of my true inherent value. It brutally forced me to completely sever the heavy, suffocating dead weight that was actively drowning me. While I am standing in a gorgeous ballroom surrounded by elite business leaders and loyal friends, the deceitful people who attempted to completely bury me are currently living their own personal nightmares. Marcus is currently serving a mandatory 3-year sentence in a harsh federal correctional facility for his extensive wire fraud and corporate espionage crimes. His days of lazily lounging in 5-star luxury hotels are permanently replaced by rigidly strict schedules, cheap orange uniforms, and the stark, depressing reality of a cold steel cell block. He will spend every single day of his incarceration fully knowing he senselessly traded a $2 million estate and a perfectly loyal family for absolute, undeniable ruin. Brenda, the arrogant, toxic matriarch who gleefully championed my early demise, is now living alone in a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment on the rough side of town. The bank successfully foreclosed on her sprawling suburban home, completely stripping her of the fake, superficial wealth she worshipped so dearly. She is entirely estranged from both of her foolish sons, spending her intensely lonely days sitting by a silent telephone that never ever rings. David, utterly humiliated by his wife and her highly publicized infidelity with a powerful billionaire rival, officially finalized his divorce and abruptly moved 3 states away to escape the suffocating neighborhood gossip. The entire fake empire they arrogantly built on false entitlement and massive deceit was completely reduced to ash, scattered to the wind by the heavy, undeniable consequences of their own malicious actions. The soft, rhythmic chiming of a crystal glass draws my attention directly back to the present moment. My brilliant lead assistant Tanya approaches me with a warm, encouraging smile, signaling that it is finally time for my highly anticipated keynote address. I walk confidently up the red-carpeted stairs, stepping up to the polished wooden podium. Hundreds of powerful, deeply inspiring women turn their full, undivided attention toward the main stage, their beautiful faces perfectly illuminated by the soft ballroom lighting. I look out over the massive crowd, feeling an incredible surging wave of pure power and absolute stunning clarity. I eloquently recount my harrowing journey of decisively overcoming vicious corporate sabotage, deep personal betrayal, and suffocating familial toxicity. I speak passionately about the vital, undeniable importance of strict financial independence, the absolute necessity of establishing ruthless, ironclad boundaries, and the beautiful, wildly transformative power of firmly walking away from tables where basic respect is no longer being served. The captivated audience hangs on to my every single spoken word, nodding along in deep, profound shared understanding. As my triumphant speech reaches its emotional conclusion, I look directly into the glowing red lens of the primary broadcast camera, recording the live event. My posture is perfectly straight, and my voice rings out with total, unyielding feminine authority. We are frequently taught to compromise our brilliance simply to maintain a false, fragile sense of peace, I announce loudly, staring straight down the dark lens. But shrinking yourself will never protect you from insecure people who are fiercely committed to misunderstanding your immense worth. Do not ever let anyone tell you to remember your place, unless your place is sitting exactly at the very top of the mighty empire you built.